Hello, everyone. I'm Edith Cooper, co-founder of Medley. Welcome to Medley Moments. At Medley, we believe in the power of connection. Every day, we see how group coaching helps leaders navigate complexity, build meaningful relationships, and grow in ways that are deeply human. Excellent leadership has at its core a real sense of responsibility. In this era, we owe it to ourselves, our teams, and our organizations to learn to use AI skillfully and to understand its strengths and the opportunities it allows. At the same time, we must sharpen the most human skill we have, judgment, not taking AI's outputs or its promise at face value, but rather discerning what to accept and what to challenge and what to reject. Today's conversation is truly a special one. I'm joined by my Medley co-founder, Jordan Taylor, and two of the incredible coaches in our network, Archana Bharathan and James Renwick. I'll hand it over to Jordan.
Thank you, Edith, and thank you again, Archana and James, for joining us. We are so thrilled to have you and for this robust conversation we're about to have. For quick introduction, Archana has spent 15 plus years as a global executive coach and leadership strategist, 10 of which of those years she's been designing programs for institutions including MIT, Wharton, Yale, and UC Berkeley. She is a certified Zen leadership coach and an organizational psychology practitioner. She's also based in New York. Thrilled to have you joining us, Archana. James Renwick, he spent 20 plus years in leadership roles across government, creative, and the nonprofit sectors. He's a PCC ICF certified professional coach. He is the founder of Recast Coaching. We've had the pleasure of getting to work with James and Archana across multiple of our global programs, and really excited to get their perspectives today, not only in what they're seeing in their Medley groups, but also in their broader executive leadership practices.
So I share my thanks and appreciation for Archana, you and James joining today, and for, quite frankly, bringing Medley experiences to life. You both work with leaders who are navigating an incredible transformation, and that is taking place on a number of fronts. But today, we're going to specifically talk about AI. AI is evolving rapidly. Work is becoming more distributed, more ambiguous, and more complex, and leaders are being asked to adapt faster than ever before. There's excitement. There's also a fair amount of confusion, fatigue, and to be honest, some fear. It's a significant change, but one that is quite confusing. Many leaders are asking, what should I automate? What do I protect? How do I lead when the ground keeps shifting beneath me? That's why today's conversation is so important. We're here to explore how leaders can embrace the benefits of AI without losing what makes them and their teams human. So let's get at it. Let's get started. Archana, let me start by asking you the first question. What are some of the biggest challenges that leaders, teams, and organizations are facing at this moment, specifically as it relates to AI and its impact?
Edith, what a great question to kick us off with. And Jordan, Edith, James, just so thrilled to be here with all of you today. My name is Archana Bharathan. I'm a certified global executive coach and a leadership strategist. I'm also a certified Zen leadership coach and an organizational psychology practitioner. You know, I've been thinking about framing these questions that we've been seeing around AI on 3 levels. You know, Edith, you brought up the human level. And then along with that human experience in an organization, you have the team's experience and then the systems experience, right? And so at this individual level, at this human level, leaders are wrestling with so much of uncertainty, right? That confusion, that's such a good word, because I think that more than uncertainty, confusion feels a little easier to grasp. And so now you have AI, it's drafting your first email, it's making appointments for you. Sometimes it's even vibe coding to fit into culture. And so it's exactly as you said. If AI is handling all the coordination, leaders are asking themselves, where do I add value? And the same thing moves into the team level, right? AI, in many ways, is redistributing power. The person who curates or trains the AI, or the teams that do that, they suddenly have outsized influence, almost sometimes invisible influence across the streams within the organization. And that could create ambiguity around decision rights. And so then when you start to take all of this and build it out into the system, into the organization, what do you see? You see that possibly there is a need for redesign, governance, workflows, handoffs. They all seem to like demand change. And the thing is, if that doesn't happen, we may land up with duplication or silos. And so, yes, there are challenges, but I think as coaches, we all know this, that with every challenge comes an opportunity. And I'm sure we're going to get into that in our conversation today.
Thank you. As we all know, community plays a powerful role in shaping how people lead and work together. In the face of so much change, how can leaders and organizations maintain a strong team culture as AI becomes so integral to work? Would love to hear both of your perspectives. And James, perhaps you start, and then Archana, you can chime in.
Oh, thank you, Jordan. Such an important question. I think it can feel quite lonely in leadership right now, with many of us feeling less connected than ever before, less connected to each other as humans, perhaps less connected to our values, to meaningful work, maybe to the great outdoors and to nature as well. And it also feels like we have so much to do and so little time available. The tendency is to bypass the connecting as humans and to jump too quickly into the getting stuff done. So a sense of human connection and belonging, relatedness, a sense of feeling like we're part of something bigger is a universal motivator, has never been more important. And thinking about AI, and in my experience of working with leaders, there's often an assumption that everyone else is ahead of the curve. It's kind of the opposite here from that statistic that 80% of drivers think they're better than average. And an opportunity to connect with others in a space where they're able just to let their guard down and to share their lived experience of some of the concerns or fears or excitement around this topic, and to feel validated, perhaps that they're not as far behind the curve as they thought they were, that they're not the only one. It feels like a huge opportunity to create a conversation where people feel part of something bigger. And I believe, and what we see within the Medley conversations that we hold, there are so many opportunities for us to support one another, even from competing systems. When we're able to, put our egos and sometimes our job titles to one side and just accept people for how we show up, and to listen with them, and to be really, really present, and to ask great questions. So I think there's a huge opportunity right now, and a requirement right now for us to do more to support one another through this.
I'd love to just follow up on that before, Archana, we hear your point of view. James, so if leaders are leaning in to support one another as we go through this change, what else could they do? If they're feeling threatened, if they have that sense of fear about what might be to come. Would love to hear more about how people could lean in if they wanted to.
Yeah, great question. I mean, Archana, I love your way in to looking at this through the human, the organization, and then the wider system. And I'm of the belief that we can't be great leaders unless we're great humans first and foremost. So a lot of this work in leadership starts with ourselves as humans. And thinking about all of the things that are important to us as humans that have been called into question or compromised by the rapid advancement of AI, well, they also present opportunities too. So I'll call some out, just a handful. Status, that's universally important to us as humans. Our perceived position in the pecking order of life, and it plays out at work in hierarchies. In a Medley group, I heard someone refer to FOBO, the fear of becoming obsolete. What a threat to our status, the existence of our jobs as we know them. Certainty, that's another one that's important to all of us. Life has never felt less certain. Autonomy, It feels like, AI is being imposed upon us sometimes, or perhaps our autonomy is being taken away in the choice of content we consume. And relatedness, we've talked about the importance of human connection. So all of these things, Jordan, we can optimize for once we start to see them as an opportunity. So I think working as groups and as individual leaders, working through systems, how can we start to condition the environment so that these things actually play to our advantage? We start to improve the sense of certainty or status or autonomy or relatedness or security for people, as opposed to see them as something that threatens these things.
Thank you so much, James. Archana, would love to hear your thoughts as well on this.
Yeah, I loved what James had to say over there, right? A lot of times that feeling of threat, it comes from wanting to protect something. And we're living in this world where, we talk about agentic AI, and we talk about how as humans, how can we work with agents who are doing our work already? How are we going to protect our status? How are we going to protect the purpose that has always given us momentum when there is someone that, or something in many ways, because who knows, someday it could become embodied, is already doing things at a faster pace than we ever could? And I loved what James said, because let's go back to thinking what makes us human, right? It's the community, it's the connection, it's the things that we have not yet seeded into the world of AI. And I feel like, James, when you were talking about the research, it's so true that research shows that connection helps us buffer uncertainty. It accelerates resilience. So in many ways, when you talk about the conversations that we're having here in Medley, it's one of the reasons we have them, because it really does help accelerate growth and in many ways thinking within organizations. Very organically, I was having this conversation, right? A Medley group conversation. And what struck me was how AI was showing up differently in different systems. But then when it came to challenges, the way that all of the members, all of the participants would talk to each other, it was about whether it was building guardrails to ensure agentic AI, or whether it was about how to continue to hold on to trust and belonging. The thing is, that's the role of community, right? And that's something that AI may not be able to quite do as yet, which is being able to keep the community, keep the purpose, keep the belonging intact. And so I would say the best leaders, in many ways, they may design for both efficiency of the system and also belonging of its humans. So, go right ahead, let the AI do the heavy lifting on all of the tasks, invest more deliberately in the rituals, in the conversations, in the shared meaning making that we as a community of humans can provide.
I was just about to say, Edith, I know you have lots of thoughts on this and would love to hear your point of view. I'm pulling you in.
First of all, I have so benefited from conversations with Archana and James and our other extraordinary coaches that make Medley come alive, because I am on a nonstop learning curve. And even thinking about our conversation today, you've prompted thinking that actually will be super helpful to me as I attempt to impact and navigate this environment. The one thing that is really striking as a thread is that we're all a little bit uncomfortable here, because the pace of change and the potential impact of AI and everything that's spinning from the conversation of AI is an uncomfortable place, because it requires significant time, investment of resources, and it's in many ways viewed as something that's not negotiable. But here's the interesting thing. I think it's an opportunity for all of us to get comfortable together being uncomfortable. And this is where, as leaders, we really need to open the apertures of our thinking to recognize that there are many people within the organization who are doing the day-to-day work, right? Who aren't getting the job done, that are going to be important sources of truth with respect to where AI can effectively be deployed. And it gives a level of connectivity that I think is super powerful. that no longer is it going to be okay for leaders to do their thing in leadership and everyone to do the day-to-day work. There's got to be more connectivity that I think is super interesting. So with that, how do leaders deal with that uncomfortable zone, the fear and uncertainty, James, on how to navigate the organization as the pillars of what has been success in the past might be shifting, and how might it shift?
Yeah, thanks, Edith. And how do we manage our bodily response to
Yes.
a perceived threat? I was co-facilitating a walking and coaching event just last week in Richmond Park, UK, which is a deer park, on the topic of AI and its impact for leaders. And there is an abundance of deer, and yet they're really hard to get close to because they're constantly scanning for threat. You could see their ears prick up in the distance.
They're very big, those deer in Richmond Park, very large.
And it's kind of the same for us. I think as humans, we are constantly on alert for danger. And whether it's perceived or real, our body responds in exactly the same way. It manifests as a negativity bias. But that fight or flight or freeze or fawn modality, that state that we enter when we're activated, it prevents us from doing our best thinking and actually to start seeing these things as opportunities. So how do we deal with that reaction to that stimulus, that perceived threat? I think can be approached physically and perhaps consciously too. And I know Archana can build on this. I mean, physically, just slowing things down as leaders, really slowing everything down, because we're always in such a rush to get stuff done. And that helps us shift from a sympathetic nervous system to our parasympathetic nervous system. It manages that fight or flight or freeze or fawn modality. Breathing, taking some deep breaths to remind the anxious part of our brain that it's okay, we're safe, we're not in real danger. And posture, Amy Cuddy, if you haven't seen her TED Talks on body posture, do watch them. She has an abundance of evidence about how our posture affects our brain chemistry and the release between cortisol and testosterone. We all sit up. Quite literally, preparing us for entering into some of these challenges more openly. So physical shift moves are really important. And then there are conscious shift moves as well. And I take a lot of inspiration from someone called Jim Deathma and Diana Chapman, who wrote the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And what they say is we spend most of our time below the line, they call it. Below the line is an activated, threatened state. That's where it feels like life is happening to us. It's a victimhood state. And there's always drama that plays out in that state. And it's only once we notice that we're in that place, where am I in the context of what's happening around me, that we can start to accept ourselves for where we are and the feelings that are emerging as a result. And we can ask ourselves, am I prepared to shift to a more resourceful state? And it's curiosity that is the antidote to being below the line, that activated threat. And if we can just bring curiosity, how fascinating, what can I learn from this? What's this here to teach me? Then we're able to shift to a place of resourcefulness where we take a bit more responsibility for our lived experience, for all of these opportunities. And we're able to approach the challenges from a place of presence and curiosity and wonderment and open-heartedness. And that's where, guess what, we're able to do our best thinking, because the blood isn't in our extremities preparing us to run away. It's in the right part of our brain that requires us to do this thinking. So physical shift moves, breath work, posture, slowing down, and then conscious shift moves, getting curious, how fascinating, I think allows us to overcome some of those sensations of fear.
I appreciate that, James. And my brain immediately goes to, okay, if these are some tools that leaders can deploy to manage their own response to this change, how can leaders best support their teams and the individuals that they're engaging with who are encountering the same change and anxious about AI? Archana, I'm curious about what you would think about that that question.
I love how James set me up. And that was perfect, James. You kind of knew that you were doing it. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to take that, right? Like, so much of what we do as humans, right? The neuroscience behind it, the simple things that you talked about, the physical shifts, the curiosity. Imagine if we could scale all of that, right? If at the individual level, if we were able to find that groundedness and that resourcefulness within ourselves, to then be able to support our teams, support team members who are anxious about AI. And going back to, I would say, like really ancient wisdom, first name it, right? Name the emotion. Is it anxiety, or if it's stress, or if it's fear, or if it's feeling threatened, like name it. And I think once there is that space for people to name their feelings without leaders, and I love that you said this, James, right? I'm just going to take it, like without the need to rush in to reassure you with facts, but sort of just having that space to feel, to have that sense of loss, that sense of uncertainty, to possibly even have those questions around status or security, then maybe we can start to put things into a framework, right? I think the number one thing that comes to mind for me is how can teams and team leaders educate themselves? So the first E, like demystify AI, show teams, demonstrate, do it with them. So it's not just something that you're delegating, but in many ways get hands-on with them as to what AI, and specifically what agentic AI can do and cannot do. I think the clarity, the connection, it really does help to mitigate fear. And that mitigating of fear, that spreads at a team level, right? When we talk about psychological safety, in many ways, those 4 steps that help with psychological safety start with this first step, which is how can you educate and how can you do things together. I would say the second thing is, as you're doing things together, like create safe to fail pilots. Things that the team can try together. And so I don't know whether it's vibe coding labs, whether it is being able to have safe spaces where you can figure out what outputs could be without pressure. And I go back to, this is something that I was inspired by what you were saying, James, which is when we slow down, and a very good mutual friend of ours, she loves to say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. When we slow down, we allow the organization at the system level to start moving faster, to start seeing around the corners, to be able to get more resilient, to build agility, to grow innovation. And so that in many ways brings me to a third E, which is how can we empower? How can we keep humans in the loop, make clear where human judgment, and I love that you use that word early on, Edith, where it's human judgment that's irreplaceable. Because at the end of the day, AI can scale workflows, but it's us humans who can scale trust.
Thank you so much for that, Archana. I'd love to just run with this question of the irreplaceable human elements that we all think are not going to be disrupted by AI. Edith, you and I have talked a lot about that connection piece, which I know we've touched on as well in this conversation, James and Archana, and the power of human connection, the power of belonging. Personally, I do believe that nothing is going to replace real people-to-people relationships and friendships and in-person time together, virtual time together, even conversations like this. I don't think that AI can fully, replace that. But Edith, you've had a few conversations with people in various types of roles who will share anecdotes that, their ChatGPT is someone they go to, and someone that's nice to them, and someone that doesn't give pushback. And would just love, Edith, for you to share a little bit of that sort of alternative perspective, although I know it's not, your personal view, but I think that's an important piece of this conversation.
Well, it's really a good follow-up to the thoughts that James and Archana shared on creating space, being thoughtful, and taking space to go fast. in reality, I would say that is the next generation of leadership, to pause and think and be thoughtful about everything. When in effect, most leaders pride themselves on moving fast and moving fast for impact. And I've had several interesting conversations with leaders who would suggest that actually the interactions with their AI assistant, tool, bot, et cetera, is probably the most meaningful interactions they've had. Why? Because they can ask a question and not be worried about pushback when the answer isn't just right. They can, get an incredible amount of information back that after prompts and interaction gets closer to their thinking. But here's the interesting thing about that. It is a reflection of their thinking. It's a reflection of their bar of what excellence looks like. And the extraordinary thing about strong organizations with extraordinary people and center of gravities around culture is that it's the dynamic interaction where someone actually doesn't just answer the question that you've asked. Gosh, I know it's really frustrating. But the reality is it's the person in the room who looks at you and says, but wait a minute, I don't agree with you. I'm not sure that these tools are really built to say, I don't agree with you and I'm going to debate that. I will also say that right now, although things are evolving quickly, these tools are not meant or best positioned to reflect the future and to incorporate the personalities that drive decision-making in an extraordinary world. And so I think at times, and I've prompted this in my conversations, again, I'm adapting AI language, but that I've asked in these conversations is, well, how would your team be more effective if you spent the same amount of time going back and forth and debating? And so, Archana and James, I would ask you this question. When leaders want to get to the answer in the most user-friendly way, i.e. leveraging these tools, how do we encourage them to understand the power of developing the moves to create interactions that test their thinking and their mindset?
Gosh, I love that, Edith, because in many ways you're talking about how presence at a human level can be spread across teams and organizations, right? It's this shift from fear that you were talking about, James. It's from fear to intention. And it's not about mastering the tool like everything else. It's not about mastering the rules like everything else. It's about how open can you be to learning, to have that learning mindset, to be able to have the resilience to continue to learn. Because what we are seeing when we interact with ChatGPT, when we're interacting with other forms of Gen AI, is that when you are able to learn from it after the prompting, whether it's the first time or the 50th time, that's when you also start to grow. So it's really about, if I could say this, it's mastering your state of mind. And if you're mastering your mindset, that usually comes through practice, it comes through connection, and it comes through a level of, if I can bring in systems language here, through a level of safety across the system where you have the shock absorbers to be able to manage the complexity within the system.
Thank you so much. Yeah, James, would love to hear from you as well on that.
Yeah, thank you. Conscious of time, but I think what we're talking about is waking up to our power. The humanness of all we do has never been more important. And creating deeply human experiences, just like we're doing now, just like we do within, Medley groups, I think it holds one of the keys to our way through this collectively together.
So, as per usual, we are just starting this conversation and we are running out of time, or we have run out of time. First, I'd like to thank Archana and James for joining us today. As as I've often said, we are all beneficiaries of learning from you both and the coaching community. I'd also say that there's so much for all of us to learn, and I would just put that as an opportunity. Let's all get involved. Let's think about the tools. Let's think about how we interact with them, and do the work to really understand how we show up, when we show up as leaders, but also as humans that care about making an impact. And I'll hand it to Jordan for the last thoughts.
Thanks, Edith. Thanks again, James and Archana, for joining us. I have lots of takeaways from this conversation, but what particularly stood out to me is just how deeply leaders need to really lean into that connection and own the opportunity and own their power. This type of conversation is exactly why we created Medley. The importance of us having spaces to connect, grow, and learn with one another applies not only to the groups that we do, but also in how we all, as a collective, try to continue learning. So huge thank you, and looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. Thanks, James. Thanks, Jordan.